Great, thanks. And welcome back to another episode of Legal Unicorns, the podcast that shines a light on those in the legal sphere, legal professionals that hail from the African continent that are doing something different with their lives and their careers and their journey. And we find out more about them, where they're going, what they're doing, and hopefully inspire the next generation of legal professionals from this fine continent. Today, I am absolutely delighted to be joined all the way from South Florida, Clea Strydom. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Rob. I'm very excited to be here.
Excellent. And now, just in a short introduction, and I've got it here, so I'm going to read it off my screen. You, besides acting as the Centre for International Law and Policy in Africa, which stands the shortened version of CILPA, as their project coordinator, Clea facilitates a number of projects, including the Network for Young Scholars and Practitioners within the Southern African branch of the ILA, which is the International Law Association, which you established, as well as being the Honorary Secretary for the branch. She also acts as the Vice Chair of Events for the American Society of International Law's New Professionals Interest Group. And at CILPA, she focuses on transitional justice and international criminal law issues. While as an independent researcher, she researches and writes on technology and law, especially AI, weapon systems, and international humanitarian law. Clea also works on environmental law issues and is currently a researcher for the legal team representing Mozambique and Sierra Leone at the International Tribunal for the Law of the Seas. Law of the Sea, rather, in their advisory opinion on climate change and the marine environment. There is so much in there, Clea, that we need to unpack because it sounds like you probably never sleep. You're certainly never bored, I imagine.
That is very true. Very, very true. But I am very insistent on my 8 hours of sleep. So despite the fact that there's so much going on.
Honestly, I think, as I said to you before, when you and I started talking, which I think was on LinkedIn, and I just said immediately, I saw your background and I said, I have to have her on the podcast because to me, you are, and we're going to get into your journey and we're going to talk, fully about everything you do. But what jumped out at me was the fact that you are the epitome of everything that we want the podcast to be and what the podcast is, which is really someone from this continent who's taken their life in a different direction, has moved around the world, and then the work you're doing is really I guess, and I'd love to find out more, is really impactful to African legal professionals and maybe even further than that, especially if you're involved in some of the environmental law issues. So what I'd like to do first, Clea, please take us on your journey from South Africa, Germany, China, America, and everywhere in between.
Great, Rob. Yeah, it's a bit all over, and I have to be honest that it wasn't planned that way. I sort of stumbled through it in some regards. I grew up in South Africa mostly. I was born in Bloemfontein, and my dad was I'm a Free State girl. Goeie Afrikaanse.
Our second podcast guest from Bloemfontein, and it's
really?
It's a place I know quite well actually. We've got very good friends who live up there. So yeah,
okay.
Carry on. Sorry.
Yeah. So my father was a lecturer, professor at the University of Bloemfontein in international public law. And because of that, he did a lot of research stints in Germany. So every 4 years, we'd go live in Germany for something between 6 months and a year. And then we'd come back again and then go again. So that was my whole childhood. And that's also how I ended up at the German school in Johannesburg when we moved to Johannesburg because my dad got a job at UJ.
Is your parents German? or is your
No,
father
no,
German?
no. No. Both of them are very much Afrikaans, very Afrikaans family,
Okay.
all the way back. No, it just happened that he got a research funding to go to Germany. The von Humboldt
Okay. Okay.
scholarship, which is a very good scholarship that paid for him to go on a regular basis. Um, yeah, so then we moved to Johannesburg, and I went to the German school. After school, so I first wanted to become a chef. That was actually my dream, is to be a chef. So through high school, I did a lot of training, and then realized long hours in a kitchen is probably not the right thing for me. So I au paired in Germany for a year, and then came back to South Africa and studied politics, philosophy, and economics at the University of Johannesburg. But even though I wasn't pushed
Yeah.
into it, I was always destined to land in law. I'd grown up around it. It was such a big part of my life. Especially with my dad being in human rights and international humanitarian law, it's not just a job, it's really a calling almost. So, dinner
Yeah.
conversations revolved around human rights. And my mom's also very engaged in the community, and was during apartheid very engaged in, anti-apartheid activism. And so it just was very ingrained in me. So I finally landed at Stellenbosch, did a BA law and LLB. Then then I went to work for a commercial law firm, a small boutique law firm in Cape Town. Our clients were mostly mining companies, but we handled everything for them, and then we did a lot of commercial contracts. It was, for me anyway, a very toxic work environment. Commercial law just wasn't my thing. I was like, I didn't go to study law for what to me felt making rich people richer. And the environmental law things we did do was really about circumventing, environmental law, not necessarily
The wrong
saying
side.
it. Yeah, the wrong side. So that didn't last long.
Yeah.
A couple of months, and I decided I need to get out. Oh, then I
Did you
tried
do?
my
Sorry
hand.
to interject. Sorry, Clea, and just to interject. Did you do that to do articles, or were you working there
Yes.
in a different capacity?
No, I was doing it to do articles. For me,
Okay.
I left law school, and during like my final year at law school, I wasn't really sure. I wanted to do my master's in international law, but everyone was like, "No, go do your articles first. That's what you should do. You finish law school, and then you do the articles, and then later, if you want to specialize, you can do that." And I listened, and I really shouldn't have. But so is life. And then I tried my hand at starting my own business, and I had a couple of clients for a couple of years, actually, startups that I helped with terms and conditions for their websites, contracts for employees, registration, any legal requirements they had. I profit advice on.
And
And
was this
then I
based out of Cape Town? Sorry,
Cape Town,
is that based out of Cape Town? Yeah.
That was based out of Cape Town. So yes, absolutely. And I kept those clients for a number of years after I left. And then on a whim, I decided, I'll go teach in China. I need a break. I need to figure out what to do. I need to earn some money. I should add, though, that my mom went to teach in Indonesia a year or two before that.
Okay.
So it really sounded to me like a good way to see Asia. I'd never been, to make some money and figure out what I needed to do with my life. So I landed in China, worked at first for a business English training school. So businesses would come to them and send all their staff to them for English business training, either to help them with presentations or just general English or so forth. So I was based in Shanghai, which, by the way, is an amazing city. If you
It is,
want to
yes.
visit China, Shanghai is fantastic.
Yeah.
It's different.
I mean,
now,
I might go.
post-COVID.
I might go as far as saying, don't even bother with Beijing. Actually, just go to Shanghai. It's really, really cool.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Shanghai it's different now for foreigners, especially since the end of COVID, or like post-COVID. China is closing up a little bit more again. But the time that I was there, it was very open to foreigners, and we had an amazing life there. So that's, yeah. So when I say we, that's where I met my husband, current husband, who is American. But yeah, so I did my master's only by research dissertation while working full time. Can I
just interject there? Does he know he's your current husband? Are you just labeled? Which is what my wife describes me as most of the time. So yeah, you're the current one, but you know,
the current one might not be. You know, my life's always like in 5-year increments. So we'll see in like 3 years' time what the situation is.
Is it? Yeah. Is he behind the camera, sitting there going, "What? I mean,
what?
No one told me."
No, I think he's well aware. So, so I did my master's through the University of Johannesburg. But only dissertation based. The UJ's got an excellent, if anyone's interested in international law, they've got the chair for international public law. So it's a really, really good place to do a master's or a PhD in international law. And they really have great funding available as well. Again, I'm biased because my father is the chair for international law, but it is really a great program, and especially if you're working like I was full time and you don't really have time to attend classes, but you want to write a dissertation and you want to obtain a master's, it's a great program. So yeah,
it's good to know.
And then we got engaged in COVID in 2020 because we realized we needed to get out. Things were getting prickly, to say the least. We had a sensor on our door, and every time we opened it, the community police would call. It was getting unbearable, unfortunately. And we realized we had to get out, and there just wasn't a location for us to go to with 2 separate citizenships that made sense on such short notice. So we got engaged. I went back to South Africa, completed my master's, finishing touches, then went through the whole immigration process. And with anyone thinking of going through that, especially to the United States, I just practice a lot of patience and follow the steps. Don't try to do any shortcuts. A lot of my friends have tried to, jimmy the system a little bit. We followed it step by step, and it worked out pretty well that way. And then I moved to the United States in end of 2021. Okay, yeah. So then went through the whole immigration process and landed in the United States. So I moved here in October of 2021 and have been
right. So still relatively new.
Absolutely. Yeah. Still going through the whole process. I obtained my green card and work authorization last year. So that's also very, very stressful because for the first couple of months, you're not allowed to work at all while you wait for this whole process to go through. So it took about, let's say 8 months before I was allowed to work. I still did, but earn money at least. You can work, but you're not allowed to earn money, which is strange.
I get that. I think actually, just while I have you on that point, I think that's a really valuable lesson for anybody listening that wants to move overseas, which many, many people do because they contact us all the time, is one of the things that you said there a few minutes ago, which is absolutely so true, is when it comes to immigration, do not try to cut corners ever, right? There is a system. There is boxes to check. Whatever country you're in, it's always the same. Just follow the system. Otherwise, they will catch you. You'll have it turned down and you might not get another chance. So, no, I'm with you on that. When you said that, I thought that's because as I'm sure you know, I've lived all over the world. And if you try to jimmy the system, as you say, you're going to get found out and there's no point. So no, that was a really good, valuable lesson to learn. Plus the whole point of, I guess for you, you had to, getting into America, when they're checking your sort of your paperwork and everything, I guess the first thing you have to prove is that you are actually in love with your husband, and that it's not just a marriage of convenience and things like that. Because I've done all that with my wife here. You know, you have to prove that you are together. I guess you're still having, well, maybe not having to go through that now, but yeah.
No, I still do. And, you know, the thing is that I'm South African. So, I mean, I have the benefit, and I'm going to say this, I've got the benefit of being white. America's not, there's more scrutiny when you're from what Trump likes to refer to shithole countries. You know, there's just sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear, if you need to cut that out, but
no, you carry on. But you know, yeah, I'm laughing at his sheer ridiculousness of the man that you mentioned.
It's just ridiculous. So, you know, there is more scrutiny on you if you are from a third world country, a developing country, and then there's even more scrutiny if you're Muslim or of color. So you have to take those things into consideration. Despite that, follow the process. And I saw this with China and America, which I think are two of the strictest systems to get into when it comes to immigration and work, permits. And if you follow the process, it runs smoothly. It takes time, and there's, but it works. It works.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, that level of bias and dare I say discrimination when it comes to other nationalities who want to live abroad, it is true. It happens. You can see it. You can see it when, even if you're white like we are, you go through the process. You can see other people being treated differently. And even when you're going through the border control at Miami Airport, which, as we just discussed off camera, is one of the single worst airports in the world.
Avoid it.
Avoid it. Find somewhere else to go as your point of entry. But you can see the way that the lines are lined up and the questions you ask. Albeit, though, I must say that America is a fantastic country to go to when you're in. It's not that easy to get in, and they make you feel like a criminal, and why would you want to be here? But obviously, once you get in, it's an amazing place. That is something I'm sure you're going to have to go through, because you're obviously applying for your green card and things like that, I guess.
Yeah, so I have my green card. So how it works with the marriage path is you go get a fiance visa, then you come to the United States, then you have 90 days within which to get married. Then you apply for, the 90-day fiance. There's actually a show on it.
Yes, there is. I mean, were you on it?
Yeah. No, I wasn't on it. No, that would have been cool. Maybe it would have given me more money for that. But yeah, so I landed a week later. We were in the court, for a quick ceremony. Then you've got, so then once you're married, then you can apply for what they call adjustment of status, and your work visa at the same time. Then you go through that process. That took us about 8 months waiting time. Then you get your work authorization, and then you're supposed to go for an interview, to prove that your relationship is real. And then you get, your green card. And then with a marriage green card, it's 2 years conditional green card. Then after 2 years, you have to prove that you're, still happily married. Then it's 1 more year, and then you can apply for citizenship. So it's only 3 years with marriage, while it's 5 years if you take another route.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting. This is really valuable information for people who listen to this who want to move abroad, which, just to give you an example, any time we put something out there from our marketing team about moving overseas, it is the highest clicked on episode or downloaded PDF that we have. And that's not just from South Africa, that's everybody in every country looking to have international experience. So this is really valuable information, actually, funnily enough, although, it might not be for anybody who's not looking to go overseas, but it is. And I think, my own experience of coming to South Africa, obviously coming the other way, is that I've been here nearly 7 years, and my visa is still linked to my wife. Like, so
Oh, wow.
like she often jokes with, like, I could get you kicked out, So,
yeah. Don't mess up.
Well,
don't
please
mess
don't.
Up.
Don't mess up. Exactly. Well, I sort of, please don't, because I've got the business here and we have children. But I get it. But no, that's really useful. So you and your husband, you're still only, I guess, what's the date? Yeah, 2 years into being in the US and being married. So you're still settling in your life in South Florida.
Absolutely. And, one thing, this might also be useful for your listeners. The US legal market is very difficult to break into without a US law degree of some sorts. It's easier in Europe, but in America, you're competing. First of all, lots of people study law. You've got it's not like South Africa, we've got a handful of universities that have good law programs, just because of the sheer size of the country. You've got all these great universities with great programs, and it's a fairly closed system. So I'm finding it difficult. The job that I have now with CILPA was through a connection, and I was very, very fortunate that I knew a South African that worked for the UN here, who knew this professor who had started this organization. But otherwise, it's very, very difficult. And I have a lot of friends from all over the world that work here, and they've all had to either redo law school or do a master's in law,
really,
to be able to work here in the legal field. So that is really something. If you want to, if you're willing to, not work in law, then it's different. But if you want to use your law degree in the sense of practicing or even working for an organization that does international law, you need a US law degree.
That's interesting. That is interesting, and that is important for people to know that before they start booking their flights and expecting to get a job there and just walk in. Yeah, look, I mean, it's one of the things that I often say to people as well, is, when they are preparing to move overseas, is you have to know all of the lay of the land. You have to know what qualifications you need. You have to know how relevant you are currently to the market and how to make yourself more relevant, because especially in places like in the US, the UK is another one, Australia potentially, Canada, some of the other bigger markets, the legal markets, they've got a lot of people. There's a lot of people looking for work, and a lot of people who won't need the sponsorship or the visa or whatever it might be. So that's something to bear in mind. Okay, so I want to touch on something I'm reading here in terms of what is very interesting to me is that you've obviously grown up in a family that feels very strongly about human rights and humanitarian issues. It is no wonder that corporate and commercial law did not really suit you. It's obviously something that's almost chalk and cheese in compared to how you grew up and the environment you grew up in. Your dissertation for your master's was on weapon systems with autonomous functions and international humanitarian law. I guess that's probably long in the past now, but that's an interesting topic that is very relevant to African nations and Middle Eastern nations. And what kind of angle did you take, as in what these systems that are deployed often, whether they contravene humanitarian law, or what was the angle you were looking at?
So it's very interesting. So I specifically chose weapon systems with autonomous functions. And while it's long ago, I still write on it quite a bit now, and I'll be attending a conference in Stellenbosch later this year to talk about it. And, so it's still very much at the top of my list of things to talk about and write on. So I specifically chose weapon systems with autonomous functions instead of AI weapon systems, which is the more broadly used term, because I think language is important. And when we think of AI weapon systems, we often have images of the Terminator, and it's problematic for me how we talk about AI. It's problematic for me how we talk about AI in general these days, and it's become a hot topic, especially with language models and so forth. So I chose that term because we are using existing weapons, and it will have certain functions that it can perform autonomously. So this idea that no military is actually going to give up complete control to a weapon system, that's a crazy idea. That's not how the military functions, anyone's military functions. Control is a big issue, and top-down control is a big concern for militaries. So I really try to approach it from a more practical standpoint than, for example, a lot of international organizations say ban, condemn, which for me is not feasible, because militaries are going to do what militaries want to do. Countries are going to do, states are going to do whatever it takes to, win a war, protect their own civilians, steal resources, whatever it is that people get involved in armed conflict for, they are going to use the best technology that's available to them. So for me, it was really about how can we put in regulations or standards for how these weapons are deployed in the field. So my focus specifically was on what we call the meaningful human control element. So that, and the argument is that there always has to be some kind of meaningful human control over the weapon system with autonomous functions. Now, what meaningful means is, subjective, or can be interpreted in many ways. But if you look at a lot of documentation and guidelines that have been produced by particular militaries, especially the Department of Defense, the United States, and China as well, they always maintain some kind of human control over these weapon systems. So for me, it really was, my end conclusion was, we can't avoid these weapons. Like, there's no way weapons are going to be used. But how can we come together as an international community and say, okay, but these are the minimum standards for their use?
Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. And when you are here in Stellenbosch, please let me buy you a coffee. And I would love to hear more about that particular topic. I think, obviously, I'm not coming from an educated perspective in regards to the weapon systems and the human. Obviously, the very idea of war and weapons sort of doesn't really, and the word humanitarian, for me as a layman, don't really sort of correlate. Obviously, in an ideal world, if people have to go to war, then maybe they could just blow up buildings. But sadly, there happens to often be people in those buildings. It's a fascinating topic, and obviously something that is very much in your wheelhouse in terms of your background and your experience and your education, but also, having sort of addressed it, that there needs to be minimum standards, global minimum standards. I think it's that makes perfect sense. If you're gonna play badly with each other, there should be at least a framework within which you should do, because otherwise as you say there, certainly with the advent of large language models and AI and AGI and whatever else is the buzzword this week, it does conjure up, especially when it comes to weapons. Anyone who is of my age and maybe slightly younger, it conjures up pictures of RoboCop with just just going off and not being able to be controlled, and that is obviously frightening. to say the word, the least.
Yeah, it is. And it absolutely is. But this existential threat of AI, and it's interesting that it's usually AI entrepreneurs that invoke the existential threat of AI, like Elon Musk, the guy from OpenAI. They've got this existential threat of AI. It's going to take over. But what it does, it simply deflects from the issues we have with AI right now. And our current concerns with AI are actually a lot more important than that existential threat. The bias in AI, how AI is used for cybersecurity, which is often, just basically large mass state surveillance. The energy consumption of AI, the data that's being stolen through AI systems. Those threats, for me personally, are so much more, first of all, immediate, and second of all, bigger than this existential threat of, AI is going to take over. But it's an interesting marketing ploy by AI entrepreneurs. Deflect, so I can keep developing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's fascinating, isn't it? Obviously we've not in our lifetime we've not dealt with anything like this in terms of AI and AGI, but it is a standard clever marketing tool, if you like, if you're the one that owns it, to make everyone scared of it. Talk about these big, fanciful, like you say, existential threats that it's going to take over, it's going to take all your jobs, it's going to destroy the planet, it's going to do this, and you're sitting there, layman's like me and that guy down there, worrying about things that maybe in our lifetime won't be a concern. But the immediate is that you deflect away from, you get people talking about that wider threat while you're still sitting there going, oh, and by the way, I own the system that you're all using. So, I'm actually, we can talk about this and we'll probably be, we may have differing views, but I actually quite like Elon, but I don't actually believe much of what he says, because most billionaires are full of BS. And they'll do whatever they need to do to create more and more shareholder value, more and more revenue, and everything like that. It is an interesting one. I'm not as concerned as some people are. I think like any technology, we can if we can get hold of it, we can adopt it, and we can use it for good, whatever that good may look like, then it's a good thing. But I think it's an interesting one that you say about get them talking over there whilst we're. It's a classic example, isn't it? We saw it with COVID, and we saw it with. Well, you're living in the country, but we all watch American politics, right? And we can see it anytime someone starts rowing over here, have a look over here and see what they're actually doing.
Oh, yeah. No, America's a very interesting case. At the beginning when I first moved here, it really upset me. American politics really riled me up. How partisan it is. Now, I just laugh. That's all you can. You can't take it too seriously, because it's a shit show. And I have to add that, and I'm a big proponent of seeing the rest of the world and traveling and living in different countries and experience. But and I'm sure the grass isn't always greener on the other side.
Very true.
And that this idea that everything will fall into place, everything will be better. America's got its problems, different problems than South Africa. We do have electricity 24 hours a day, which is great. But, women's rights are being curtailed. Yeah, I'm well aware. Yeah. But women's rights are being curtailed significantly. So, you have to.
I'm glad you brought that up, actually, Clea, because that's something that I feel incredibly strongly about, not just as a human, but also as a husband and a father of a daughter. And I've actually, unbeknownst to you and maybe some of the listeners, I've actually been very, 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 very deeply involved in gender equality issues when I was living in Asia. I was one of the founding signatories of the Women's Foundation, which aimed to get 50% of all board members female, and at that point it was like 0.01 in Hong Kong, and probably even less in China. And we've done. I've helped a friend of mine launch a gender equality conference, which she launched years ago, is still running. It's probably well over a decade ago she started that, and I was assistant with that, and helping other consultants on that side of things. So I'm glad you brought that up, actually, and obviously I don't want to go off on a diatribe because this is all about you, but I'm glad you raised that, because I think that's something that not a lot of people are really focused on. Is I'm 47 years old, right? So I'm old enough to have gone through the 80s and 90s and remember it, when people like my mother would fight tooth and nail for equal rights, equal pay, etc. And now you just see this new breed of attack coming on, and again, I'm sitting there going, where's this coming from? And, it might be simple as say, look, I've never had a problem with trans people, but suddenly I'm being made to feel, as I'm sure many listeners are, that we're not doing enough or we're not caring enough. I'm sorry, but I do care. I want everybody to feel welcome, and and honestly, if I'm brutally honest, I don't care what you do or what you look like. Yeah. Like, I don't care. I'm very much of the Martin Luther King model of, judging people by the quality of their character as opposed to the color of their skin or what they do. But yet, women are under attack in work and in sports and in colleges, and America seems to be in a really difficult place with that. So from a humanitarian perspective, I'm very worried, like really worried, more so than AI, absolutely. To be honest.
No, yeah, more than AI, and I think that's another. No, and as I'm also, and in terms of what I do in Africa, I'm very much about female empowerment, and any project we run, we always make sure that there's a lot of gender balance, and that women's voices are being heard, and that we give them agency. And then being in this first world country, which is also, America has been now classified as a backsliding democracy, and
interesting.
It's absolutely true, and it's really worrisome. And what's so interesting for me is, under the Republican model, it's really about as little as possible government control. That's really about what original republicanism is about, right? You've got very little government control. You've got
small
individual choice, small government. Yeah, but they still now legislating on issues that, where there's a lot of involvement in people's private lives, whether that's the LGBTQ plus community, whether that's women's rights, about, their bodily rights, whether it's, it's just, sex education. It's just becoming where the government's actually now, especially local governments and state governments, really creeping in to the private lives of people more and more.
It's a strange one, isn't it? Because again, given my age, I grew up in with an 80s feel of America, where America was strong and Rocky ruled the world, and it was the land of the free and the brave, and everyone wanted to drink Coca-Cola, and and everybody loved America. Certainly, where I grew up in south of London in the UK. But and again, I've got, this is just my opinion from someone who reads and watches as much as I do. It's awfully becoming a lot like China. It looks like it really does. There's certain elements of it, and again, that's probably not going to make me certainly popular in certain angles and with certain people, but I didn't want to live in China anymore. One of the reasons why we left Hong Kong is because we spent a decade there, and don't get me wrong, the two are very different. Hong Kong is the Hong Kongers are some of the best people I've ever met. So are some of the Chinese, to be fair, and I'm sure you can equate to that living in Shanghai. But in terms of systems, let's be honest, the CCP can do one. You know what I mean? But the Hong Kong and that creeping into everything that you do and everything, and starting to control everything you do. We wanted to leave, so we left, and then to coin something that the commentator Russell Brand said the other day, the world needs a strong America, and it needs a fair America. And looking out from outside in, that is questionable. It does seem to be that, like you say, women's rights, trans rights, LGBTQ plus rights, everything seems to be under attack and creating fights with everybody. And all the while, the government, whatever side of the aisle they sit on, is coming through the middle, just controlling and controlling and controlling. It seems to be a very strange time.
And like you said, the world does need a strong America. I mean, I don't like a strong America because I think they're bullies, but it doesn't need to be America, but it needs to be a country that's got enough economic power and moral power. But America no longer has that moral guidance, and you're seeing more and more nationalist governments all over the world. In Europe, I'm very concerned about some European nations, about the way they're going in terms of nationalism. You saw it in Brazil. I mean, in Africa, that's the different kettle of fish, but which with its own issues. But we don't have that shining example of democracy anymore.
Own the future of recruitment today. Access a secured, anonymized global talent pool. Connect with qualified candidates through multiple private label databases. By creating your own Stintit, you can achieve the following. Step 1. Access your company dashboard by logging in. Step 2. Click Find Candidate to search for the ideal candidate. To begin, create a new position and fill in the necessary details. The system will search through multiple databases to find the ideal match for you. Step 3. Once the search is completed, you will instantly receive multiple 100% matches which have all been fully verified and KYC checked. Step 4. When the candidate chooses to opt in, you can view their skill set and experience. Only when you are satisfied, use your credit to unlock the candidate's full profile. Once unlocked, the profile remains unlocked for all future searches. What makes this system truly revolutionary is that when you search, the search will continue in all the different databases until a 100% match is found. Each database involved and the candidate share in the revenue, and that's how this circular revenue model and shared database benefit all parties involved.
Okay, welcome back to Clea. We have had a bit of a technical issue, which meant we had a bit of a break for about a week. So it's lovely to see you again. Thanks for joining me. So good to have you back with us today from sunny Florida, which you just say is extremely hot. And what I really want to do is I want to get straight in to the work that you're doing is it CILPA? CILPA, Center for International Law and Policy in Africa. If you could just give us a quick rundown of what that is and what you're doing. I know there's a lot of listeners that are very interested.
Yes, absolutely. So yes, it's a Center for International Law and Policy in Africa and was founded by Professor Charles Jallow. He's originally from Sierra Leone. He worked on the special court in Sierra Leone, which handled a lot of the unrest that took place in Sierra Leone, also linked to Charles Taylor from next door, who then ended up in front of the ICC. And then a couple of other matters as well across the world. And he's also a member of the International Law Commission. So CILPA really at the moment it's a fairly fledgling organization. We think of ourselves as a think tank and an NGO. But we really work, NGOs can take many forms. So we don't invest in sort of grassroots projects or anything like that. We really try to develop policy around international law issues in Africa. So an example of that could be, for example, last year we worked on a project where the African Court of Human and People's Rights, its jurisdiction is being expanded to handle, amongst other, also international criminal law cases. And your international international crimes are the traditional ones you find in the Rome Statute, which is the statute of the International Criminal Court, and that's genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and the more iffy one, crime of aggression, which, you know, is very much linked to what's happening in Ukraine and Russia at the moment.
Oh,
but
okay. That kind of aggression.
Yeah, that kind of aggression. Yes, not domestic aggression, but
not in the supermarket going, I am going to take you to court.
No, not that kind of aggression. Like, I'm going to invade your country and take your resources kind of aggression. But the reason I say it's iffy, it's not that the crime's iffy, it's a little iffy in the Rome Statute because it was added in later into the International Criminal Court as a crime in the Rome Statute, and not all the countries that have ratified the Rome Statute have agreed to the crime of aggression being an actual crime. And there's political reasons for that, you know, for obvious reasons. So we worked on looking at, it's called the Malaba Protocol. If anyone's interested, you can just type in Malaba Protocol, and this is trying to extend the jurisdiction of the African court, right, to include international crimes.
Can I? Sorry to interject, but just very quickly, where was that started? Where in Africa does that relate to at the moment?
So it's linked to the African court. So it will just be extended. And the reason it happened is because of the issues that Africa has with the ICC. So, you know, because they were like, the ICC is coming into Africa, it's prosecuting Africans in a European colonial power. We want a court that can prosecute our own people, okay? That protocol, so I don't want to get into too much detail, but that protocol it's not in effect yet, okay? It doesn't have enough signatories yet. So the court is in Tanzania, just for those that are interested.
But I mean,
it's a regional court for the whole of Africa. So, you know, but the thing is that protocol isn't in effect yet. So we looked at but it's got a lot of defects, the protocol. There's a lot of issues with it. So, for example, one of the projects that we ran, which was called the ACRI project, the African Court Research Initiative, was trying to look at how can we remedy the defects in the protocol through rules and procedures and evidentiary materials. So that's one project, for example.
So obviously you can't just fill the holes. You can't just ratify and rectify and go, okay, that's broken, let's sort this. You've actually got to sort the policies and procedures out first. It's actually very, very interesting. I mean, obviously, those that read the news across Africa will understand that there's always quite a lot of media pressure on having African issues dealt with in Africa, as opposed to, like you say there, you know, European courts deciding on the fate. So it's interesting that that's in place and something that, like you say, is being expanded. And by expanded, do you mean in terms of I suppose everything, the jurisdictions it covers, the policies and procedures, the actual workings of it, if you like?
Exactly. So it will. The idea is to have it 3 chambers, to have the Human Rights Court, General Section, and then the Criminal Court. That's the idea. Obviously, there's funding issues. Like I said, there's a lot of issues within the protocol itself. There's a lot of gaps, and you can't go back and change the protocol because it was already a struggle to get it adopted as is. So it really started with al-Bashir in Sudan. So I don't know if you recall, but a couple of years back, ICC issued an arrest warrant for al-Bashir from Sudan. There was sort of a peace process sort of ongoing in Sudan, and then he traveled to South Africa. South Africa didn't arrest him. And then a whole bunch of other African countries also felt like the ICC was imposing sort of almost a colonial will on on
touchy
Africans.
subject.
It's a touchy subject, right?
Touchy subject.
So that's one of the projects. Then we've worked on a lot of transitional justice issues in Africa. For example, the Gambia. So the Gambia, under the rule of, and I'm going to butcher his name, so please excuse me, Jammeh, who was the previous administration there. Lots and lots of crimes against humanity, especially sexual crimes. So there was a truth commission that was set up in the Gambia, and it's an incredible report that they delivered, really worth looking into. But I believe it's volume 10 is just on sexual crimes
that were happening in Gambia under his administration.
In the Gambia, yes. And not to get into too much details because it's very depressing, but, and that includes rape as a tool of war to suppress communities. That includes Jammeh himself having, comfort women, so to say, but, a lot of sexual slavery. And the Gambia is now going through this transition process. They've got a new government, but there needs to be a reckoning. So they are establishing special courts. So we call these internationalized courts. So they're not international courts because they're grounded in domestic procedure, but they prosecute international crimes. So an example of this is the Extraordinary African Chambers that was set up in Senegal to prosecute Hussein Habre from Chad. So it was a localized court in Senegal. All the majority of lawyers and people working in the court were Senegalese. And the procedures were based in Senegalese law, but they were prosecuting those international crimes I mentioned earlier, genocide, crimes against humanity, and so forth. So those are the kind of projects we work on. Yeah. No, so that's just the kind of project.
There must be some correlation between the ICC and the court in Africa. They must work together, I guess. I mean, recognizing international.
Yeah, so actually the Rome Statute makes provision for it in terms of domestic courts that says that domestic courts, in terms of admissibility, domestic courts must first prosecute these international crimes. They're the court of almost first instance, right? It's only when they are unable or unwilling, and there's a whole bunch of, tests and things or they cannot, that the ICC steps in. There isn't, however, that provision for regional courts. So, for example, this new proposed African court, it's not clear how the processing, would work with that in terms of, can the ICC step in before this African court has actually dealt with the issue and so forth, because it doesn't provide for that. But in terms of domestic courts, it does. They don't really necessarily need to work together, the ICC and these internationalized courts, but they do need to sort of wait until that process is played out before the ICC can step in.
And if it affects the ICC, if it affects other jurisdictions outside of those that the African court has jurisdiction over, then I guess, okay. Look, it makes sense to me. I mean, as a layman, someone who's not involved, and obviously, and someone who's moved to the continent, it is a very, I don't want to use the word complicated, but it is. Large parts of Africa are very tribal still. Large parts of Africa are still developing. They need something else, I guess, is probably so I can understand that. I mean, but what a fascinating project for you to get into. You really landed on your feet, didn't you?
I was very lucky.
So interesting.
Very, very lucky. And in terms of, and it's very interesting cases or things that, so we write policy, and, we had a whole project last year that was looking exactly at the relationship between Africa and the ICC, African states and the ICC. We had a project last year on universal jurisdiction. So universal jurisdiction is, so as lawyers, we all know that in order to prosecute a case, you need jurisdiction. right? So there has to be territoriality, personhood, there's a few. Universal jurisdiction is, and you're seeing this a lot in Germany, for example, that prosecuting crimes that happen in Syria, even though there's no link really. So that's what universal jurisdiction is. And you can only have universal jurisdiction over international crimes. So we had a whole project on that. So, this is very relevant in the context of Ukraine and Russia, because, can a third country, not the ICC, but a third country prosecute the crimes that are happening in Ukraine, on both sides? So, so it's very relevant.
What's the answer? Can they?
What's the answer?
Just to put you on the spot.
Sure. It depends on the domestic legislation of the country.
So, okay. Makes sense.
Germany has very broad domestic legislation on universal jurisdiction. Belgium has very broad legislation on universal jurisdiction. So it would really depend on the country. And the verdict is still out about, some countries believe that it's really only piracy that you have universal jurisdiction over. Some countries believe that you have universal jurisdiction over all the ICC crimes. So it's still and in a very big way, it's still very political as well. There's certain superpowers that would prefer that other countries don't have universal jurisdiction, because those superpowers are not party to the ICC. They don't want to be prosecuted in another country. So it's a sovereignty issue.
I wonder who you're referring to.
I wonder.
Yes.
I do not think I should insult my host nation at the moment. Not until I've got citizenship, at least.
No. Well, they're not the only ones. Yes. But that's incredible work. Not just for you as a professional, as a legal professional who's left these shores and had this opportunity to continue to work on things that are going to really make a genuine difference. But again, sorry to repeat myself, but the work you're doing and your colleagues are doing is really genuinely going to make a difference. Okay, it's a hard road ahead, I guess. It's a lot of political moves and getting it right, and everyone's always going to have a complaint about something. It'd be like a giant game of Twitter, wouldn't it? Everyone's got something to moan about. But it's amazing work that you guys are doing. And how big is the organization in the US?
It's me and Professor Jello. It's me and Charles.
Oh, cool.
That's at the moment. Yeah, we have an advisory board, a very impressive advisory board, and we've got a very impressive board of directors. In terms of day-to-day work, it's the two of us. And so I'm the project coordinator, but I do a little bit of everything. And then we've got interns. And we try to always use interns from Africa. We're quite adamant about it. Unfortunately, it doesn't always work out that way. But yes, we really try to. And then we've got a partner on the ground in Sierra Leone called the Center for Accountability and the Rule of Law. And that's our institutional partner.
No, that makes sense. And think tanks are traditionally, some are, those that are building tend to be quite small at the start, don't they? And then you use interns, and especially if you're using interns from these shores, I don't know whether I should put your email address at the bottom. You might be
absolutely
inundated,
please.
But I will if you like, because I think there's such a yourself. I mean, not just in this country in South Africa, but throughout the continent. Whenever you travel through the continent, there's just wonderful young legal professionals who are so incredibly passionate about human rights and other similar issues as you were growing up. I think that it'd be a fantastic opportunity for them to get involved if they can. But in terms of your project coordination, obviously you're involved in research and the policy suggestions and the papers and things like that. But are you also involved in, I don't know what to call it, but raising funds, I suppose, or raising interest or awareness and that kind of thing?
Yes, absolutely. So all our projects are run with funding, so grants, and it's a process to apply for them. A long, tedious process. You have to create budgets, and I was not good at math at school. I was, more language, history, and that's why I went into law. So
I was going to say
I got thrown into this role.
Why you studied law, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I studied law. And then so a lot of it is just budgets. Budgeting for projects and applying for grants, and that's a big part of my job is making sure we have money so we can actually implement these projects.
Sorry, go on.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, just from a purely interest perspective, do you have an office to go to? Do you go to an office, or is it by Zoom, or do you work remotely, or is it based in Florida, where you are based?
So we're registered in Sierra Leone, but we have an office at the Florida International University. They've been very supportive of the project, and that's also where Charles Jello is based. He's a professor at FIU. So they've given him office space and some resources.
Fantastic.
But it's with Florida traffic, it's on a bad day, it can be a 2-hour drive, but it's supposed to be 50 minutes away. But so I work mostly from home. And, a lot of our projects are global. Obviously, none of them are really in Miami or in South Florida. Yeah, so most of my work takes place online, as well as my projects outside CILPA.
Yeah, I was just interested to see, really, obviously this is a podcast about you and about your journey. And I don't really mean your actual physical journey every day, but it just purely out of interest. How do you get together, swap ideas? I mean, good universities, as we know, the campus can be an inspiring place anyway. It can be, I was at Wits University late last year doing a talk with African law students who would have been very interested in what you had to say, actually. So I might put you guys in touch. But that was, and I just found it incredibly inspiring. It sort of took me back 20 odd years. And I think that's a great place to work. But, okay, so the whole centre is really, the think tank or the organisation is focused on, the centre, if you like, is focused on Africa as a whole. Is there, are you at liberty to say what projects are coming down the pipe? Is there anything that you're particularly interested in at the moment? Is there anything that you're getting funding for? What's coming down that road?
So I can't say from whom, but I can say that we do have a project on reparations for slavery that is potentially coming down the pipeline. Difficult topic. So what, especially here in America, it's a lot more controversial than it should be. Let's just put it that way. But what we're really looking at is we're trying to look at the international legal basis for reparations for slavery. And we're really talking about slavery in terms of the transatlantic slave trade.
Rather than
lots of other forms
Eastern
of slavery.
Yeah.
There's lots of other forms of slavery, but we're really talking about the transatlantic slave trade. And about whether there is a potential avenue for descendants of slaves in the transatlantic slave to claim for reparations.
Do you know what would be very interesting? Because obviously this is a topic that is often discussed these days, especially in the US and on these shores as well. But what would be very, very interesting if out of all of this came a real understanding of the history and what happened, what genuinely happened. Like, how did it start? And obviously it didn't just focus in West Africa. It focused on, I was reading a stat by the author Douglas Murray the other day that was saying that the largest number of slaves were based in the Middle East during that time, and who benefited, and how. I mean, clearly it shaped many economies around the world, so I think I might be wrong. I think my daughter's learning about it at school at the moment, yeah, no, in fact, I know she is, because she asked me something the other day, a very basic question. But I was sitting there thinking the same thing, thinking, well, to truly understand history would be fantastic. So your part is all about actually this end and the reparations, as you say, and the legal standing for that, and who would get it, and how it would be distributed, and why it would be distributed, and I mean that goes on for 100 years itself, really. I think.
No, it's so complicated, and obviously it's politically, people are scared about the domino effect of it, right? Because where does it end then? And yes, it's very, and especially and I think, having, for me now, living in the United States, coming from South Africa, my husband and I often talk about this, about how when we talk about how we learn history, his version and my version are very different.
And my version.
I mean, America, and your
from what I learned in the UK. Yeah.
I mean, just so everyone knows, this is a fact I recently learned, but America single-handedly won World War II all by themselves. But joke.
Well, but, my grandfathers might debate that if they were still around.
Exactly.
But
exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. So and then especially you're in Florida. Just an interesting fact: education is receiving a bit of an overhaul, especially in terms of slavery. The way slavery has to now be taught in schools in Florida it's problematic, because
what's Ron been up to? What's he up to?
Oh, Ron! Meatball Ron! Trump refers to him as Meatball Ron. So Meatball Ron has.
Where does the Orange Man get these nicknames from?
They're fantastic. They're fantastic. So Meatball Ron has said that we're the way slavery is taught in America makes white people feel guilty. So we now need to flip the script slightly, and we have to recognize that Black people really benefited from slavery. African American.
Wow, I mean, that is a sentence that I would not do you the disservice of clipping at any point. But please, in context, that needs to be. The context is very important here. No, no. I mean, that you don't make those kind of statements. Again, let's go back. Let's go back to history. Let's really. Again, appreciate that what we were all taught was something very different. I learned when I moved here to South Africa that the Boer War happened, because we didn't learn that at school, either one of them. And there were a lot of older people that I met whose parents and grandparents were in the middle of it, and they weren't very happy with me at one point. But I was sitting there, but I think if we could get more understanding of that way the world works, I mean, and then but Meatball Ron is making statements we shouldn't be making.
No, really, it's just not a statement you make. No, and it's and I'm absolutely with you there. Like I'm a big believer in knowledge is power. We can't really move forward until and especially here in America, they haven't been able to move forward properly from their racist past, slavery, civil rights movement. They haven't been able to move forward because there has been no true understanding of what happened. In South Africa, and I know this is now again a very controversial subject, we had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
Yeah.
And I know, and now again, people are saying there were lots of, it wasn't perfect in any way, but it helped us heal in many ways, not completely. And, there was definitely gaps, but America's never really had that. There's never been there was this very slow transition from, and that's why I think they still have so much systemic racism here too.
It's a really interesting point, because it's something that we talk about a lot as well, is, because I married into an Afrikaans family, which, and they are very, very good people, very nice people. But, some of them voted for the National Party. So, I occasionally remind them of that. And one thing that strikes me, and it's all relevant, is the lack of understanding and the lack of knowledge and the lack of history portrayed and educated in the right way. And really simply, and I know I'm sort of simplifying this, but I'm going to anyway, is the fact that no one ever said sorry. No one said sorry. I've watched interviews with former chancellors of Germany, like Helmut Kohl, who says things like, "I'm embarrassed to be German. We have never apologized enough for our past." Even Angela Merkel said similar things when she was there, continuously apologizing for what the Nazi Party caused, or certainly the Reich and the Germans of the 1800s. Keep saying sorry until there's no one to say sorry to. And I think the Americans have. It starts with that, in here in South Africa, there is a guy that's making quite a lot of noise at the moment, and I know American conservative American, shall we say, commentators are focusing on him, Mr. Malema, quite a lot at the moment, because he was caught the other day doing his fantastic chant about "kill the white man." But people like that don't come up if you deal with things at the beginning, or if you say sorry, you get proper reparations, you get proper things in place. People like that don't appear, and they don't get stronger. But look, I mean, to be honest, you and I could probably talk about this forever, but it is,
and it's probably not as good as two white people sitting here on a screen talking about race.
However, it does show. It should show any listeners that people like you and I are aware, and we're not afraid to discuss it, and we're not afraid to. For me, it's about making sure that it never happens again, and you make sure that you do things like that by educating people correctly. And then we have to go back and look at the whole education system in schools. And people have to stop being so terrible to each other as well. And hopefully we can.
Well, I think that
move on from that.
And that talking thing is very important and talking about it across races. And I think so much of it has become so taboo or so sensitive. People can't have an open discussion about things anymore because they're worried about how they're going to come across. They're worried about saying we have to be able to talk about things because there's other ways. There's no way of moving forward. If we just,
I completely agree. And here at GRM, we're all of mixed backgrounds and mixed races, and we spend probably too much time when we should be working, talking. And because I'm fascinated. I want to understand how people have grown up. I want to know what they've grown up under. I want to know. I want to know where they grew up, the challenges that they face, and the discussions that are had at home. And I'd rather talk to the people that I know rather than looking on Twitter, which is obviously just a lot of angry bots throwing anger at each other. But also on social media, you have a lot of people who make statements to wide audiences that are completely inaccurate. I'll give you an example, actually. I won't say the lady's name because she's American and she, you live in a very litigious society. But there was a, shall I say, a social media influencer who tweeted over the weekend about South Africa. She's a white lady in America with about 300,000 followers, so a sizable audience, and stated two things. She said, in 2018, the South African government confiscated 300,000 rifles from white farmers. And today the government is now calling for genocide of all white people in South Africa. Full stop, moving on. The whole thing went boom, like so many tens of thousands of comments. And I just went, I live here and your statements are inaccurate. I mean, I'm not a voter, so I don't care who's in power. That, you know, it doesn't really matter, does it, who's in power? But the ANC has got a lot of faults. But I was here in 2018, and I mean, where did she get 300,000 rifles from? That's one stocked up farms. I can tell you that didn't happen. That definitely didn't happen. And no, the ANC is not calling for genocide of all white people in South Africa. In fact, certain politicians within the ANC government have very garnered quite a bit of support from their white voters, to be honest. So it's not as completely one-sided. But I just think I'm mentioning that because I think that's where social media really is a downfall, because she made that statement like, she's probably never even been here, right? I mean, to be honest. And she just made a statement and then leaves and goes and creates this storm of emotion. But
she probably follows Steve Hofmeyr on social media and then, you know, just copies that.
Is he still around?
I think so. I actually read an article about him here in the United States the other day, and I was like, oh, in, you know, a fairly right-leaning sort of magazine here the other day, and I was like, see, that's problematic.
Yes, it is, and it's misplaced. But I think there's organisations, just to bring it back to CILPA, there's obviously great organisations like with wonderful people like yourself and the professor that you're working with, who are from the continent, understand the challenges that countries like Sierra Leone and Sudan and probably Niger now going forward, sadly, and other countries that are constantly facing problems. And there's no policies and procedures in place to make sure that women are protected, children are protected, the most vulnerable in society. And I suppose that's a big focus for you, is it? Women, children and the vulnerable, given your human rights background.
Oh, absolutely. You know, any vulnerable group, you know, they... when there's any kind of violation of human rights, of international law, of, you know, just basic human decentness, it's often women that suffer the most. I'll give you an example. I am not through CILPA, but through other channels. I am working on an environmental law case in front of the International Tribunal of the Law of the Sea. So a group of island states requested an advisory opinion from ITLOS, International Tribunal, on what state obligations are in regards to protecting the marine environment on climate change. So I'm part of a legal team. Fair point, you know. So I'm part of a researcher on a legal team that's representing 2 African states. And when you look at the data, and you look at the raw data, and you look at the science, climate change affects women especially hard. And you see that and children, women and children. And you
I'd love to know why. That would be really interesting. Okay. Please educate me.
So just on a very basic level, climate change, especially when it comes to the marine environment, it affects fishing. Okay. A lot of fishing communities in African states are actually run by women. Because, you know, it's often the men have to work somewhere else to earn money, you know, whether that's more inland mining, whatever. So they do a lot of the fishing, and that's just subsistence fishing. And it's not for them to sell and get rich of. It's not like a Chinese trawler that comes in. It's
No.
for them to survive, right? It's how they survive, them and their children. So they are seriously affected by it. And then, not a direct effect, some of these women make baskets for fishing that they then sell. They can't make, if there's not enough fish to be caught, there's less business for the baskets. So that's a very sort of practical example.
Yeah, that's like one of 1,000 reasons. I mean, but it's something that probably some people don't, when you said it, I was like, oh, that's interesting. Tell me why. And then they're two, dare I say, and I don't mean this with disrespect, basic reasons, but they are very pertinent to the local village economy throughout Africa. Okay, so you're doing some work on this, yeah?
So that's a climate change thing, right? And then unfortunately, so one of my, not through CILPA, but my master's and what I write a lot on is international humanitarian law. So that's basically the law of armed conflict, right? So what are the regulations when states or non-state armed groups are in a conflict? And unfortunately, sexual violence as a tool of war, especially in Africa, is still very, very widely used. More like, it's shockingly how much. And that affects women. And then, in terms of women's education, when there's armed conflict, there's often not, women are pulled out of schools. And then you've got cases where, you've got insurgent groups kidnapping girls. For ransom.
That happens throughout Africa, right? I mean, that's happening. That's a real problem.
So, often in a lot of these scenarios, women are worse off. Women and children are worse off than other parts of the population.
Disproportionately as well. Disproportionately worse.
Absolutely.
How do you, Clea, you and I have obviously just met, but and I'm not just saying this because I'm pleased to meet you, but you seem like a really wonderful person, and you're clearly very passionate about human rights and clearly about the environment as well. This sort of stuff just, I mean, I'm just scratching the surface in terms of my knowledge, but I mean, you must get so angry. You must be so livid when you read things. And
furious all the time. I mean, I have to see a psychologist once a week because
we all do, and it's wonderful.
Yeah, we all should,
and we all should.
Yeah. If you want to give yourself one gift, see a psychologist once a week.
Very true.
Even if you feel like nothing's wrong, it's just someone to talk to. But some mornings, my husband will be like, no news for you today. There's just, you're not allowed to switch on the news. I'm sorry, but you're too tense, you're too angry. You need to watch, I don't know, puppies play or something. Yeah.
Watch Seinfeld repeats or something, like something.
Yeah. Exactly.
Watch a Will Ferrell movie or something, like just take it over.
Exactly. No, but then he'll say you'll find something in there that's like political and upsets you. So, but so it's overwhelming. And some days I'm just going to crawl into bed and I don't want to have to deal with it. But I can't imagine not dealing with it. It's almost, and I tried corporate law.
You did, yeah.
I've tried that. I've tried other stuff, but none of it worked. I'm always drawn back to this.
Well, there's no putting the genie back in the bottle now, right? There's no putting that genie back in the bottle. It's in here for you, right? It's in your heart. There is, and you know what? You don't need me to tell you this, but because you probably get told anyway. But you're making a difference. You really are, and you might not be able to see it every day, but you really are doing. There'll be someone on this continent out there beyond that mountain that will be benefiting from some of the work that you do. And it's the little bits chipping away every day. People like you that will bring about change. They do.
One hopes so. Yeah. One hopes so. And I just want to, for your audience, in terms of people that are interested in international law, and that don't necessarily want to go into academia or leave South Africa. There's a massive gap in South Africa in the moment of people with a lack of knowledge of international law. And you might not think it's important for your daily work or so forth. And I'll give you a small example of why it is. So when South Africa ratifies or signs on to conventions or treaties, in terms of our constitution, the South African constitution, we have to, what they call it, to ratify, to bring it into our own law. So you have to enact domestic legislation to bring that treaty or convention into our own law.
Makes sense.
And sometimes the South African ratifies these conventions and then doesn't bring it into our own legislation, or doesn't bring it into our own legislation properly. And the reason that's important is a lot of these international conventions and treaties protect our most fundamental rights. So that even when things are going wrong on a domestic front, you have the protection of these international agreements. And if they are not properly implemented, or people don't know about them, and they're just acting on domestic law, you might not be sufficiently protected. And that's when, situations happen that have been happening across Africa with serious human rights violations. So, I really encourage everyone to, what I would recommend, that especially if you're going to the National Prosecuting Authority in South Africa, they don't know anything about international law, and it's very dangerous because when so I think international law, it's more than it appears to be, and it's very important. It's very important in terms of protecting human rights, our most fundamental human rights.
That is a really good point, because if you're a young law student at one of the universities here, and you sort of the human rights side of things, or even the environmental side of things, sort of skips you by, and your focus, your passion is on the corporate side of things. This, I'm just taking this as a bad example, but you might not pay much attention to that. But that is hugely important for the future of South Africa, a country which I'm very, very pleased to say still has the rule of law at the top, and that is so important. And you'll know yourself that it is constantly undermined by people, shall we say, who may benefit from there not being as much rule of law in the country. But it is important, and they're not trying to install these constitutions and these changes in international law or adoption of international law just for the sake of it. They're doing it because it will protect human rights. That's really interesting. Really, really interesting.
But it's interesting what you said just about commercial law. So another example, I believe it's close to Kimberley. There's a guy that breeds rhinos for conservation efforts, and then he lets them out into the wild and trying to bring the rhino numbers up again. But because he breeds them, and some of them die, or for whatever reason, he doesn't kill them for the rhino horn, but he has rhino horn. So there's an international convention for endangered species. South Africa signed it before, I think in the 70s, but never ratified it. And then the government, the ANC government, recently, a couple of years back, brought it into our own legislation. However, they left out certain clauses and regulations regarding exceptions. So this convention says that you cannot sell, for example, rhino horn, but it makes exceptions for it under specific cases, the convention. South African government failed to include these exceptions. Now this guy that's trying to run this conservation by selling the rhino horn that he has, which was, completely legally and without harming any animals, so that he can support his conservation efforts. Now can't sell his rhino horn because
they didn't bring in
government
the
didn't bring it.
exceptions.
Yeah.
And they just blindly just went, no selling of rhino horns, which,
no selling of rhino horns.
To some people and the media would be like, bravo, well done. But without reading the detail, you've just hamstrung this guy who's actually helping the rhinos.
Exactly.
And breeding.
Yeah.
And see, that's just human error, right? That's human error and
because they don't even. The minister couldn't give a good reason, because sometimes you don't have to bring in everything from convention. Government can decide
it's your law.
But you have
your country.
Yeah. But you have to have legitimate reasons for it, and the minister has no reasons.
But and again, I'm not arguing on the side of the ANC government here, because again, I don't vote, but I know from my sister-in-law who used to work in Parliament that the ministers aren't often told anything, right? I mean, they're not. They're there just to go, okay, smile at the camera, sign away. So he or she may not have been aware, but I think then it needs to be looked at even more detail and more. And there is such an abundance of bright researchers out here, like in South Africa, that would just delve deep into this. I put a job on one of the job boards the other day for a researcher. We're still going through CVs. People are going, can anything? It's a month later. I'm like, we're still working through it because there's so many good people who aren't working. So there's definitely the work to be done. Again, maybe at university level. Maybe that's something. I've got some meetings coming up with some of the universities. Maybe that's something that we could look at. But again, Pan-Africa would be very useful.
Very, very useful.
54 countries, everybody getting involved, as opposed to that. I mean, this is fascinating. The work that you're doing is incredible, and bravo to you and the professor, who are really, really leading the charge. And I think I normally have a question that is about what do you think's coming next, but there's. I mean, we could be here till Christmas. Like, there's clearly so much. I mean, honestly. By the way, what your husband, who sounds like a wonderful guy, and obviously he's got you. Like, he's like, TV off. My wife does exactly the same. She's like, sometimes poor woman. I'm on her like 6 o'clock in the morning. Go, have you read this? Like, can you believe what's going on? She's going, can I just get my coffee first before you start talking about international politics and what the WHO and the WEF are up to next? So but maybe I'll have to call you next time. Just go,
that's absolutely fine. And my husband would be very happy. He'd be like,
have you seen this?
Go talk to Rob.
Have you seen you two? I've torn all my hair out. I'm like, already. But it is. There's so much happening. But I mean, is there anything that we should be aware of at the moment? Anything that you're working on? Anything that you can? I mean, you mentioned about the reparations, obviously, but is there? I suppose the advent of technology, is that going to help? I mean, is there anything going on?
Yeah. In my personal capacity, I work on a lot of digital issues and international law matters. So my master's was on AI weapon systems and IHL, and I was part of a steering committee on digital issues and international law, and I've just written a book chapter that's forthcoming on cybersecurity and human rights in SADC countries, so in the South African Development Community. So yes, I think technology can help and harm. Again, it's just a tool, right? It's really about, and we spoke about this about all last time about, how our own biases are built into it. And it's really about how we decide to use technology. Technology has been very useful in terms of my work, at least, in terms of collecting evidence of war crimes. For example, during the Vietnam War or the Second World War, we didn't have the technology. Everyone didn't have a smartphone. Now everyone has a smartphone. But the flip side of that is everything can be edited, and you've got deep fakes, and and you were talking earlier about and you were talking earlier about about how everyone has an opinion, and someone can post it and has 300,000 followers and everyone believes it without fact checking it. So for me, technology, I think it's for the next couple of years, it's going to be one of our biggest issues, and Africa needs to learn how to embrace it properly. The chapter I wrote was really about how cybersecurity is being used to actually circumvent human rights, through surveillance.
Yeah, I mean, that's I'm pleased that, well, first of all, I'd love to get the title of that book when it's published, please. And I would love to help promote it as much as I can here on our platforms. Because I think, again, we go back to what we were talking about when we were dealing with talking about the tricky subject, as you mentioned, for two white people to talk about in terms of reparation for slavery. But it all comes from education. It all comes, the better that we understand what's happened in the past and what might be coming in the future, then the better I know it sounds airy-fairy, but the better we can help each other, genuinely. So please let me know that book. But we've talked about this a lot here as well, specifically in the legal sector, technology. If I have to read another scared headline about how robots are replacing everybody, no, you use the technology. I've talked about it 100 times, so apologies to those listening that I'm repeating myself. But, I worked in the recruitment industry in 2004 when LinkedIn was invented. And there were millions of people in that industry panicking, going, oh my word, everybody's now online. What are we going to do? Well, you adapt, you evolve, and you use the research. And then you use that research to be quicker, faster, and make better decisions. And the economist, Martin Armstrong, who I really like, he lives in Florida as well, actually. He talked, I was watching something the other day, and he was talking about, he was sort of squinting at the camera going, we've been using AI since the 80s. It's still dependent on what you put in. Google's AI, or if you use Bing, I don't know if anyone does, but
Does people still use Bing?
Yeah, I know. So
I think that was still a thing.
Someone's AOL account and Ask Jeeves and Bing, they're still there somewhere. But what you put in is what you get out. And look, there's no doubt, and certainly in the legal sphere, political sphere, and the work that you are doing, those who've never been to the African continent or spent time in the middle of Africa or West Africa or even East Africa, you won't necessarily see that we've got a long way to go first. There's a long way to get electricity to every village, and there's a long way. But it's also like a greenfield site, isn't it, in terms of technology and the way that technologies are used, especially when it comes to human rights, which is we could get it right here. We don't have to mess it up. No. And I do think
Africa's in a perfect position to get it right, because the technology has been developed and tested, and it's such a new ground. We can now adopt that technology, improve on it, and we're in a perfect position to do so.
And do what's right for African people as well, and do what's right for that. That you've mentioned there a couple of times, certainly at the beginning when you were talking about the African court, which is, in line with what I see here. The African Union doing a lot of good work as well, pulling the nations together. There is a very big drive for Africa, for African people, again, to shake off the colonial past and I think that is a really, really good thing, in terms of being in control of their own destiny. And the work that you're doing and and the light that you're shining on all of these matters like technology and environmental law and human rights is amazing. And it really is incredible. I've got so many questions for you, but I could keep you here till Christmas, I think. But in terms of you, I want to bring it back to you. There's a couple of questions that I have. One is, is there one thing that you know now that you wish you knew at the start of your career? Is there something that someone could take away from that? Difficult question, I know.
It is a difficult question because, that question is always like, I maybe would not be where I am now if I didn't do all the things I did in between. I think if I had to go back, especially to law school, I would have networked more. I would have spent less time studying and this kids don't, do as I do and not as I say, or the other way around. But I would have done more networking things, and that includes like United Nations model, like the Model UN things, or attending conferences, and I mentor quite a few students now, and I always tell them, your grades, they're important. But it doesn't matter how good they are if you don't know anyone. It's not going to really matter. And it doesn't matter. So, build your network, experience different things. Law school, and even after, for me especially, and I don't know what it's like now, but when I went to law school, it was really about finish law school, go do your articles, get them done, go work in a big law firm, billable hours, blah, blah, blah. And there wasn't a lot of focus on but there are all these other options. And very few of the people that I went to law school with, as far as I know now, actually practice at law firms. Some of them have gone and worked at banks. Some of them have gone and worked in investment firms and human rights. And I think there's so many options. So I think don't just take what is expected of you route. And, I tried that and it didn't work out. And then so if I'd known that earlier, maybe things would have worked out differently.
Well, I mean, it's great that some of the students do get the benefit of your mentoring as well, which is obviously fantastic and necessary. And it's lovely to see actually the more and more people I meet are actually giving back. There's at least, most people I'm interviewing for the podcast or outside in our, consulting work or recruitment work, people are doing what you're doing, which is amazing because it's giving back. And I often do talks at the universities here, and we're busy trying to line some others up with the law school in Stellenbosch and UCT and UWC at the moment. And what I often talk is about that, and it's now great to be able to, I don't want to inundate your inbox, but point people towards yourself and others that I've met, like Frida and Rora Sang and Lea Motsele, who's making amazing grounds in the legal tech space. And they all took different paths. And perhaps, albeit that you're not 100 years old, obviously, so we're not talking about that long ago, but even when you left law school, there wasn't quite as many opportunities or paths, shall we say, that one can take now. There are many more. I think the law degree. Look, take it for this. This is something that's relevant to you because you did law school here in South Africa, and I'm sure we're actually doing some research on this matter at the moment. So we'll be able to tell more in coming months. But real simple mathematics. We looked at it the other day. Law school is graduating 6,000 students in South Africa in law every year. Okay, decent number. There's only 1,000 CA positions, 1,000 trainee positions. So every year there is 5,000 graduates graduating from university with no idea of where to go and what to do. And I think maybe 15, 20 years ago there wasn't that many routes, but now there's more. And obviously you're always looking for interns. So there could be about 5,000 interns coming your way.
We are looking for interns, yeah. And, I think, this is something that South Africans struggle with. Working for free, I mean, and I get that, not everyone can. But while you're studying, at least, work for free.
I'm with you.
Will pay off. It will pay off. I promise you. I'm not a big fan of unpaid internships, because I always think the irony in the human rights field. But at least if it doesn't require, if you can do it from home, or and it's just a couple of hours a week and it's not full time, offer up your services free. I promise you, it'll pay off.
I mean, not only for your own education and your own experience, but also your CV will be beefed up and resume, as they say in America.
Reference letters that you
reference
need.
letters and just an insight into how the world is working. Look, you kind of caveat it nicely there with the fact that not everybody can do, but if paid internship is not a new phenomenon. Like we did it when I was, 25 years ago when I was a student. I would be working in the supermarket in the night and doing an internship in the day, or however it worked, whatever job I had at the time. And you just need to gain some experience. And that internship might be for a month or 2 weeks or whatever it is. But again, it all beefs up that experience and that sort of exposure of what you might want to do going forward or what you might not want to do. And then, the networking side of things is a really good advice as well, because look, I mean, university's supposed to be fun, isn't it? You study, you go out a lot, not a lot.
Especially, if you go to Stellenbosch University and all the wine farms are within walking distance.
I don't. Yes. I heard from my wife. I'm not even sure that they did any work, to be honest. But it is, and the conferences, a lot of the conferences and a lot of the exhibitions and a lot of the talks, especially the ones online, they're free. Just sign up, find out what you can learn, and download it and listen to it, and keep pushing yourself and. Look, LinkedIn is also, I mean, not that I'm a big fan of it, but it's also given us a huge avenue to people. And, there are people like me and you, I'm sure, as well, who, if someone messages me and asks me a question, I'm answering. I remember being 19 and going, oh, he probably doesn't want to hear from me, or then we were writing letters, but you always appreciate a response back. You always respond, so we will always, that's not just us, you and I, that's a lot of people, but
a lot of people,
I want to let you go in a minute.
No problem.
Please say that. Sorry, I interrupted. There's a bit of a delay.
Two short things, and then you can go. Then we can wrap this up. But just the one thing is that don't be scared to meet. If you see someone on LinkedIn doing what you want to do, and this is for new professionals as well as transitioning. If you're transitioning, and if you work in corporate law and you want to go into human rights law, and want to be not paid, then message someone and you see someone on LinkedIn, follow them, interact with their posts and write them a message and say, hey, I'm interested in doing what you do. Would you mind giving me a half an hour of your time? The worst that can happen is they don't answer or they say no. I mean, okay.
So what? Move on to the next one.
Exactly. And then the other thing is for those that are interested in international law, you don't have to work in international law, but if you're interested in international law, please join the South African branch of the International Law Association. It's a great community, and this is shameless, but I am the secretary of, but it's a membership-based community. It's not expensive to join. You can join through your company or institution as well. And it's just a great community if you're interested in international law.
I'm going to get those details from you, the South African International Law Association, is it?
So it's a South African branch of the International Law Association.
And it's a yearly membership, is it?
It's a yearly membership. It's for a normal individual, it's 750 Rand a year. For a student, it's 325 Rand a year. And then corporates or institutions can get 10 members for 2,000 Rand a year.
Well, look, I mean, certainly the students, that is a very reasonable price. I'm going to put the link in below, and my marketing team are going to probably kill me for this, but I think it would be well within our reach to sponsor a couple of students that are very keen to do it. So we'll be maybe we'll put that out there and sponsor a couple of students who are keen to get involved in the association. I think everyone needs a little bit of a leg up, and I think we can certainly try. Well, we can certainly try that. Like I say, I'm claiming that my marketing team might cut this out.
They'll just have to make it work. They'll be like, nah, let's cut that.
But yeah, look, Clea, this is fascinating. First of all, thank you so much for sharing your journey with us. You are a real inspiration when it comes to the where you've put yourself in your life. You know, you've clearly, you know, I remember from last week when we were talking, your parents gave you that introduction to human rights. It was clearly a passion inside you. You've not been afraid to try different things, move around the world, make things happen. You know, clearly you went to China, you met your husband, who sounds utterly fantastic and knows obviously exactly when to cut the news off, as we said earlier. What I can see from your CV and your life journey, you've not been afraid to take a chance and follow your passion. And I really mean this with a big thanks from anyone that's listening, that the work you guys are doing, yourself and the professor and the interns, and the work that's coming through is monumental and will make a difference. So thank you so much for spending some time with me again. And yeah, look, please keep us informed of everything you're doing.
No, thank you so much. Thanks for having me and everything that you do for the legal community in South Africa as well.
Thanks very much.